Good evening, everyone. Hello. My name is Deborah Griffith, and I am the University Archivist. And I, together with my partner Kathleen Seal of the State Historical Society's Rolla Research Center, are proud to present the final in a series of talks for the Americans in the Holocaust exhibit that's been going on for the last 6 weeks. The main exhibit is over, but in the back of the room, we do have the exhibit that focuses on Missourians in the Holocaust, 6 individuals and what their experiences were before, during, and after. So I invite you to check that out. Our speaker tonight is Dr. Larry Gragg. He is a member of the Department of History and Political Science, and he was active there between 1977 and 2001. He is now emeritus. He is the curator's distinguished teaching professor emeritus. Since March of this year, he has been serving as the university's historian. So if you get any of those messages on Friday from the Chancellor Mo, if there's a historical note in there, that's Larry.
Sometimes.
The voice from beyond. He has published 10 books, including Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, The Gangster, The Flamingo, and The Making of Modern Las Vegas. I gotta say, Larry is probably the leading academic historian for the development of Las Vegas. In addition, he has published a chapter entitled American Jewish Gangsters in a book titled Jews Under Arms in the Americas. And next fall, the University Press of New Mexico will publish Escaping Bugsy Siegel's Shadow, Most Said Way in Las Vegas, 1941 to 1952. So now, with no further ado, Dr. Larry Gragg.
Thank you, David. Is that loud enough, Roger? Is that loud enough?
No, now it's not.
So first I was too loud, now I'm not loud enough. Let's try it again. Can you hear me in the back? Okay, good, thank you. I was, first, thank you for asking me, thank you for asking me to be a part of this. I love these talks, and I was telling someone before we got started that I've been here over 44 years, and I have no recollection of there ever being an event like this. In just 5 weeks, we had the extraordinary exhibit downstairs. We had those 2 wonderful exhibits back there. And the number of presentations has been truly impressive. A poetry reading, a cantata, the recollections of a Holocaust survivor, the talk by Professor Shannon Fogg, who's right there, a talk by Professor John McManus, a talk by Professor Petra DeWitt. And what it reminded me of, because of Roger Weaver and his staff, how vital this library is, not just to the culture of the campus, but to the culture of the community. So thank you, Roger, and everyone who worked with you. It was terrific. And secondly, it reminded me how on this really excellent STEM-focused institution, the humanities here is so robust. You have all these extraordinary humanities professors. So it's been a wonderful 5 weeks. Well, Gangsters versus Nazis. When I turned that in as a title, I thought, that's a bad title for a comic book or a new video game or something like that. But I thought I would stick with it, Gangsters versus Nazis. So I need to start with gangsters, notably Jewish gangsters. The 2 up here are the 2 most important Jewish gangsters in the mid-20th century. The one with the hat on is Meyer Lansky. Lansky, they called him Little Man. He was 5 feet 4 inches tall, but he was truly the brains of the organized crime in Jewish neighborhoods in New York City. He had a great mathematical mind, although he never took notes. It's all up here, and everybody trusted him. He was one of the very few Jewish gangsters that the Italian and Sicilian gangsters would work with because they trusted him. But as Debbie mentioned, my real forte is the other guy. Bugsy Siegel. If you quiz Americans on who are the leading gangsters of the 20th century, people will normally name one of two people, Al Capone or Bugsy Siegel. So let me start a bit about Siegel's reputation. Why is he noted for something? If people know anything about him, it's for one of two things, I believe. One is his role. Oh, what happened to my slides? What'd you do, Katie? See, the one thing you get to do as a professor is blame somebody else if it doesn't work.
I touched the computer last.
Cool, thank you. He's noted in many people's minds as the genius who established the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas, the first truly luxurious resort hotel casino in Las Vegas. The previous ones had a Western theme, like the Last Frontier Hotel or the El Rancho Vegas. He didn't really have the idea for this place, but he completed it. And this is the casino portion. This is the way it looked when it opened on December 26, 1946. And it is truly beautiful. Now the inside, that's the entire casino. If any of you have been in a casino in the 21st century, they're about 10 times or 20 times the size of this casino. It has about 7 table games and a small bank of slot machines off to the left. 3 months later, the hotel portion opens. And it's spectacular. This is a photo taken from the casino over to the hotel rooms with this beautiful pool and all the palm trees. And there's a 4th floor suite. Who would the 4th floor suite be for? That's Bugsy Suite. Until 1991, you could stay in it. Then they finally knocked down all of it. Well, people know him for the Flamingo, or they may know him because of his brutal murder. On June 20, 1947, Siegel was shot and killed in Beverly Hills. And if you pick up any paper, go to something like newspapers.com and just look up June 21, 1947. And I'm going to guarantee you, and 9 times out of 10, there's going to be a big story about the murder of Bugsy Siegel. And I'm only going to show you the least brutal crime scene photo. He was sitting on this couch, and there was another man at the other end named Alan Smiley, and he was sitting there with his arm up on the back of the couch. The coffee table was pushed away from the couch. Siegel was reading a newspaper. Through that window, if you look real carefully, you can see a hole in the curtain. Through that window, somebody came up the driveway of the house next door and placed their carbine on the trellis outside. And the end of the barrel was 14 feet away from Siegel. What were his chances of hitting Siegel just 14 feet away? He fired 9 rounds. And because the angle was difficult, he didn't want to shoot Alan Smiley. He wanted to miss him. He missed with 5 shots, but Siegel was hit 4 times, 2 times in the chest and twice in the head. 1 bullet hit the bridge of his nose and knocked out his left eye. The other round hit him here and it came out his neck, and you can see the blood on his neck. This fascinates people. There are endless versions of what happened in this mansion in 1947. In fact, I did an interview with a Jewish journalist in early June, and she said, you know, that house is still there, and it's owned by a therapist who deals primarily with people who suffer horrendous bodily assaults. And I said, well, does the therapist ever tell them that in the front room of the house there was a terrible murder? Oh no, she never tells them that, or they won't come back for therapy sessions. Well, this interest in gangsters has triggered the opening of a mob museum in Las Vegas. It's been there 10 years, and they've already attracted over 6 million people, paying customers, to come through this museum. I've had the great good fortune of speaking there 4 times, and every time I do, everybody there is intensely interested because they want to know about the lives of gangsters. On the second floor, you get to learn about all the gangsters. On the third floor, you see how organized crime is broken by the FBI and police forces. Well, let me talk specifically about Bugsy Siegel. Most people, if they know anything about Bugsy Siegel, they know it from this movie. How many have seen Bugsy? Wonderful movie. It's an extraordinary film with great actors. Warren Beatty, Annette Bening, Harvey Keitel, Joe Mantegna. I'm missing who played Meyer Lansky, but a great cast. And when I was researching the making of this film, I actually found a published version of the script. And the scriptwriter, James Toback, said, we did so much research, books, newspapers, magazines, photographs, films from that era, and we wrote scripts. And I didn't like it, so I wrote 7 different versions of the script. I rewrote and invented. I invented scenes. I invented lines. I invented moments. There's almost nothing about this movie that is accurate. But that's okay. I long ago stopped criticizing movies because people make movies not to be historically accurate. They want to make movies so you'll pay for a ticket and go sit in the theater. But there is an extraordinary obsession that this Bugsy Siegel has in the movie. He tells his girlfriend, a woman named Virginia Hill, I must go to Italy and shoot Benito Mussolini. I must do so because the whole world is being destroyed by Hitler and Mussolini. And then he gets distracted and he goes off on another conversation, but he comes back to it later in the film and he tells Meyer Lansky, Mussolini and Hitler have to be stopped. They're trying to knock off every Jew on earth. If I don't do something about it, who will? Like the enormous hubris of this guy, that he could just go to Italy and shoot Mussolini, and then he could go to Germany and shoot Adolf Hitler. And when I saw that scene, I wasn't a historian of Las Vegas yet. When I saw that scene, I said, please, that's impossible. When I come back at the end of the talk, it's not impossible because they actually portrayed something that was reasonably close to being accurate. So this fictitious scene I talked about from this movie is kind of the trigger. Hi, Ted. Hi, Ted. Little Ted's over there with his dad. This fictitious account in Bugsy does show us something that scholars rarely ever investigate. And that is the effort of Jewish gangsters to do something to counter the German war effort, World War II, to do something specifically about the American Bund that Professor DeWitt talked about last week. But more importantly, they wanted to do something to help refugee Jews in Europe, particularly after the war was over. But first, a little bit of context, if I may. There were very few Jewish people in America prior to 1880, but between 1880 and the start of World War I, well over 2 million Jews immigrate to America for one of two reasons, either religious repression or they just were looking for a better life. And the bulk of them came between 1903 and 1907. And they came to a place where there were very small apartments, always hot in the summer, and most people lived their life in the street. If it wasn't too cold, if it wasn't too unbearably hot, you spent your time in the street. And when you're in the street as a teenage boy, you're 13, 16, 18 years old, you're going to get in trouble. In fact, the Italian boys and the Irish boys and the Jewish boys joined gangs. And I was looking for why these guys would join gangs. And there were many of these former gangsters, street gangsters, who would talk about it. One of them wrote, it was the exceptional, almost abnormal boy who did not join the gang. The gang was romance, adventure. It had the zest of banditry, the thrill of camp life, and the lure of hero worship. But then there was another element. here's another photo of Meyer Lansky as a much younger man. He later recalled that almost every day the Irish boys beat him up. Now remember, this is Meyer Lansky, 5'4", little man. And he said, me and my friends could run away, or we could fight back. And fighting back meant everything connected with it. So you got Italian gangs fighting Irish gangs, fighting Jewish gangs, and back and forth. But the important thing is very few of these teenagers ever got involved in organized crime. It was something that lasted for a couple of years or 3 years. They might have an arrest on their record, a misdemeanor, and then they went on with a normal life. Most of the Jewish immigrants, first and second generation, made their money the hard way. Going to school, working hard, doing their best to get into college, but there was this small percentage who didn't want to work that hard, who wanted to get there fast. They wanted power, they wanted riches, they wanted recognition, they wanted to get it quickly, and the best way to do it was to join an adult gang. And what really helped them was the Prohibition Amendment. Gangs, no matter whether you're looking at them in 2022 or 1972 or 1882, what gangs do well is to find out what it is you want that is illegal. It could be drugs, it could be prostitutes, it could be gambling, it could be some kind of narcotic, and they will provide it for you. So wherever there's something illegal, you can expect to find some kind of organized crime, whether it's New York City or St. Louis or, heaven forbid, Las Vegas, Nevada. Some of these guys who became gangsters, I'm thinking in particular of this fellow. He was called Lepke. His name was Lewis, but they called him Lepke. He was the founder of an organization called Murder Incorporated. These were the guys you went to if you want somebody eliminated. We need to get rid of Debbie. You don't want to shoot Debbie. You go to Lepke's group, and for a fee, they'll take care of Debbie for you. One of the guys in Murder Incorporated turned state's evidence. His name was Abe Reles, R-E-L-E-S, and he gave evidence of well over 100 hits pulled out by Murder Incorporated. And they promised him he would be protected if he turned state's evidence. So they put him up in a hotel on, it was Long Island, the Half Moon Hotel, and he was up about 6 stories. And there were policemen in the hallway. There were 2 policemen at the door. But one morning they found Abe somehow went out the window and he was killed. So it was a lesson there. If you turn state's evidence, you're going to end up that way. But Lepke was unusual in his family. He had brothers and half-brothers who became a dentist, a pharmacist, and a rabbi. And his half-sister became a school teacher. Most Jews became legitimate very, very quickly, but not these guys. Well, it's not just New York. There are gangsters throughout the country. There's a guy named Abner Zwillman in Newark, New Jersey, joined by a guy named Doc Statcher in Newark, New Jersey. There's a fellow in Philadelphia called Boo Boo Hoff. There's a guy in Boston called King Solomon. In Cleveland, there's Mo Dalitz, who ends up in Las Vegas and becomes Man of the Year in Las Vegas. And there's a fellow in Minneapolis named Davy Berman, and another guy in Los Angeles named Mickey Cohen. And some of these names I'll come back to in just a bit. But one of the things I found most interesting is that some of these guys decided they wanted to become truly legitimate citizens. They wanted to become defenders of their people. They wanted to do philanthropy. They even wanted to run for office. And the fellow who's done the best work on this, and I've come to know Robert Rockaway pretty well. He's an emeritus professor of history in Tel Aviv, so we've only communicated by email. I've helped him, he's helped me. And he first made this case in an article he called Hoodlum Hero, the Jewish gangster as defender of his people, and then a book. Okay, they did bad things, but they were always good to their mother. And Robert is a first-rate historian. I'm going to quote from him in several of these passages. Well, enough about that. Let's get to the connection between these Jewish gangsters and Nazis. And I have to start with a kind of a murky story that emerges in 1933. Adolf Hitler became chancellor in January of 33. And less than 2 months after that, someone writes a letter to the German embassy in Washington. For those of you who can't read that, I have asked President Roosevelt to publicly remonstrate with your government about the outrages upon the Jews in Germany and to demand an immediate and complete end of this persecution. In the event he does not make that statement, I notify you that I shall go to Germany and assassinate Hitler. Well, the people in the German embassy immediately send this letter to the American government. They say, do something. There's a threat to the leader of a sovereign country. Well, if you're the federal government, you will turn it over to the FBI and they conduct an investigation. This is it. You can go online to the FBI vault and look it up. It's only about 100 pages. They investigated for about 6 months and they never learned who Daniel Stern was, nor did they find out that there was a conspiracy to kill Hitler. But my friend Robert Rockaway reports that in 1988, he interviewed a man associated with Jewish gangsters, and he only called himself Dutch Goldberg. That's it. And he said he remembered there was a rumor in 1933 about a fellow named Stern, Daniel Stern, who wanted to kill Hitler. But Goldberg noted, well, that summer of 33, we learned that just about everybody and his brother among the Jewish gangsters wanted to take a whack at Hitler. So it's just kind of this thinking, somebody's got to go over there and get rid of this guy. Well, from that murky example, I want to go to a much more tangible example. This is an extraordinary vessel. It was the largest luxury liner in the world, purchased by the United States. It was going to become the USS Normandy. It was going to be a troop carrier. At Pier 88 in New York, it caught fire and it sank. This was going to be a ship that could take up to 10,000 troops across the sea. Well, immediately, the Naval Intelligence Office concluded this had to be German sabotage. The Germans must be trying to come in and do this kind of thing. And indeed, in late June, 8 German agents were arrested. 4 of them had landed on Long Island and 4 had landed in Florida. And they collectively had about $200,000. And their plan was to destroy power plants, railroad stations, bridges. Wait a minute, this is not Ukraine, is it? That's what they're doing in Ukraine. That was the whole idea, destroy the infrastructure. But all these guys were arrested and 6 of them were executed. Well, this got the head of the Naval Intelligence Office thinking about who could I consult with what goes on in the docks in New York City. And he knew about Meyer Lansky. So he contacts Lansky, and we know about this because of an investigation done by the state of New York, released in 1954, called the Herland Report, in which they interviewed all the gangsters who participated. What they wanted to do was get information of, are there any, as far as you understand, German saboteurs in New York City or elsewhere? And for this report, they found Lansky and they interviewed him. And he said, Commander Charles Haffenden, he headed naval intelligence, would call us in and he would say, we need to know about who's running the fishing fleets and the ex-rum runners selling fuel and other supplies to U-boats. Can you help us out? And Lansky said, sure. Would you tell me Who could best assist me in finding fishing boats, dock employees, leaders of ships? And Lansky said, I can do that. And there was no more sabotage in the docks in New York City. Now let's deal with the German-American Bund. Professor DeWitt talked about so well last week. I really enjoyed that. I learned a lot. Thank you, Petra. Well, this is the same photo that she used. This is the Madison Square Garden. This is the largest rally of the American Bund. And there was a New York politician, Nathan Perlman, Jewish leader in New York. He'd served in the state assembly and in the US Congress. And by the mid-1930s, he was a city magistrate in New York. And he knew Lansky. And he called Lansky for a meeting and he said, we Jews have to demonstrate a little more militancy here. You got these guys having these rallies and we're not doing anything in response. Well, once again, Robert Rockaway helps me out. He interviewed Meyer Lansky late in Lansky's life. And he learned from Lansky that Perlman called him for a meeting. Lansky met with him and Perlman said, we'll provide the money and any legal assistance that you need, but you've got to do something with these guys. With one stipulation, you can't kill them. If you kill them, you'll make them martyrs. You can break their arms, you can break their legs, you can crack their ribs, you can crack their skulls, just don't kill them. And also don't use any guns. Lansky said, okay. And he told Rockaway, I was a Jew and I felt for those Jews in Europe who were suffering. They were my brothers. Here's something I can do over here in the States. So not at this big rally. I didn't interrupt that one, but at smaller rallies, he could round up enough guys with baseball bats and brass knuckles, and they would just go beat him up. And what Lansky wanted to be assured of, there would be no connection between his men and what happened. The news stories had to be about somebody else coming in and doing this. It can't be us. So if you try and find newspaper articles about gangsters doing this, you're not going to find it. Well, it wasn't just in New York. The guy on the upper right is Abner Zwillman. He's in Newark. He led the same kind of raids against the Bund in Newark, New Jersey. And then the guy at the bottom, a guy I do not ever want to meet in a dark alley. Look at this guy, Davy Berman. He did it in Minneapolis. And then there's this fellow up in the upper left, Mickey Cohen. You see what happened to him after his? He got beat up by some of these guys. And Cohen's effort, he described graphically. I'm not going to read it out loud. I'll let you read it. They love doing this. They love going to these Bund rallies and just beating these guys up. But I really would like to focus on a more positive aspect of how Jewish gangsters got involved in all this. In 1939, an organization started called the United Jewish Appeal. And the purpose of the United Jewish Appeal was to raise money for displaced Jews in Europe. And it slowly built up and built up. As the war ended, the national organization said we need to raise $100 million to help all these displaced people. Well, every city had a quota, and Las Vegas, Nevada had a quota. Las Vegas at the time was smaller than Rolla is now. Las Vegas had about 17,000, 18,000 people at this time. Well, they needed somebody to step up and lead this effort. And there he is. Little Moe. Mo Sedway, if you think Meyer Lansky was short, Mo Sedway was 5'2". That's why everybody called him Little Moe. And boy, have I learned a lot about him. There's so much good material that I thought there had to be a biography of Mo Sedway. So there is, coming out in the fall. Sedway volunteered. He'd made a lot of money running casinos. He said, I can do this. I can raise money. And he puts an ad in the Las Vegas Review-Journal. And I'm going to read this because the font is so small. Its appeal is these children emaciated children. And the caption reads, give and they live, don't and they die. There's going to be a banquet at the Canary Room in the Hotel Last Frontier, May 4, 1946. And in the very small paragraph, to serve the surviving Jewish men, women, and children in Europe, Mo Sedway, chairman of the local drive, has graciously offered to provide all the cost of the event, all jewelry, not all jewelry, but all jewelry in Las Vegas is invited, no charge for the food or the entertainment. And the main entertainment was this guy, actor Eddie Cantor, who was Mo Sedway's friend. He was the co-national chairman of the United Jewish Appeal, and he gave a great talk. And Las Vegas went way over their quota because Mo Sedway just came in and wrote a check for $10,000 to put him over the edge. He became a legitimate citizen in Las Vegas. He helped with the drive in 47 and then turned it over to another gangster, Gus Greenbaum, who also did this. And then there was the effort to help send guns to Jews trying to create their own state. And in 1946, this fellow, Reuven Daphne, was in charge of raising money in the United States. And he got a call from somebody he did not know when he was in Los Angeles. And the guy who called him was Alan Smiley. Remember when I talked about Smiley earlier? Where was Smiley? He was on the couch. I remember when I gave a talk on Bugsy Siegel's murder at the Mob Museum. We'd gone about an hour and 10 minutes, and the MC said, okay, time for questions. And I talked about Alan Smiley being at that other end of the couch and all these bullets flying. He got nicked in the arm by one of the bullets. And I swear, the first person who asked a question stood up and she said, now, did Mr. Smiley mess his pants when that bullet hit him in the arm? I said, ma'am, I have no idea. I have no idea what happened there. But Smiley called Daphne and said, there's a fellow I want you to meet. Come to this restaurant and come in the back way. So Daphne goes and he meets a fellow who says, I'm Ben Siegel. Tell me what you're doing. So Daphne, this is his recollection of the conversation. I told him my story. I'm raising money to buy weapons with which to fight. And when I finished, Siegel asked me, you mean to tell me Jews are fighting? Yes, I replied. Then Siegel, who was sitting across the table, leaned forward until his nose was almost touching mine. You mean fighting as in killing? Yes, I answered. Well, Siegel leaned back and he thought for a moment and he looked at me and he said, okay, I'm in. So Daphne said, every week from then on, I get a call, show up at the same restaurant in the same back room, and there would always be a suitcase filled with $5 and $10 bills. By the time I left, Siegel had given me at least $50,000. So another way in which a Jewish gangster is trying to do something that he believes is positive for his people. All right, now let me circle back to that story I began with, this apocryphal story of Ben Siegel going with somebody to Italy to maybe kill Benito Mussolini. Well, the story as I read it in many, many accounts goes something like this, that Siegel meets a woman named Dorothy DiFrazzo. And she tells him that she knows that there's a scientist trying to develop a new explosive, and it looks promising. So would you like to invest with me? Siegel will say yes in this story. And she will say, well, we're going to go to Italy and try and sell this to Benito Mussolini. See, this gets a little murky because we thought he wanted to kill Mussolini, but now it looks like he wants to sell explosives to Mussolini. But in the story, when he and the Countess get there, they encounter Hermann Goering and Joseph Goebbels. And Siegel wants to shoot them. He's ready to shoot them, but the Countess talks him out of it because she's afraid of the repercussions for her husband, who is a count in Italy. And when I read these, I would go, please, no one's going to believe this could possibly be true. Well, ladies and gentlemen, much of it is true. So let me get to the Countess Dorothy DeFrazzo. The Countess had a father who made a fortune, absolute fortune in leatherworks and investing in the stock market. And when he died, he left her all the money. She was super wealthy. And she married Count DeFrazzo in Italy, but she almost never lived in Italy. She loved spending time in Hollywood. Does anyone know who the actor is she's sitting with? Who said Gary Cooper? Absolutely correct. You win the $10. Very good. He was one of many actors she went through. I mean, she just loved, she'd date one for a while, date another one for a while until she met Ben Siegel. That was it. She said, this guy's drop dead gorgeous. He's dangerous. He's fun to be with. In fact, once they heard that there was somebody who had buried a fortune on an island just off Central America. And she had a map on how to get there. So the two of them leased the ship that was used in the movie. Captain Bligh's in the movie. What's the movie? Mutiny on the Bounty. The ship used in that movie, they leased to go to this island. And they didn't find anything, but they had fun. He just liked hanging around with her. She liked hanging around with Siegel. So DeFrazzo is a real thing. And Siegel starts dating her, although he's still married. One actress after another than the Countess Dorothy DeFrazzo. And then I learned there really is this wonderful villa in Rome. It's a spectacular villa. The ceiling is painted by the Italian masters of the Renaissance, and her husband owns it. Bought it in 1923. And in 1935, he leased it to the Italian government as a place where foreign dignitaries could stay while they were in Italy. Then I found out that she goes to Italy on the ship in April of 39, the Conte di Savoia, and Siegel was with her. The reason I know Siegel was with her is that 2 years later, he was fighting a hearing that he didn't want to have to be sent to New York, and he had to prove he really was involved in something in April of 39. So they were able to bring to court the travel agent who sold him the tickets for this voyage. And they found two passengers who said, yes, Siegel and the Countess were on the ship over to Italy. So they did go, and they had invested in this explosive. I was looking for any reference to this, and I found in such magazines as Popular Science, research being done on something called radium atomite. This was supposed to be a powderless explosive. It was supposed to be very, very effective. And the scientists working on it showed them. It was a terrific explosion. So they contacted the fellow on the right, Count Ciano, who was the son-in-law of Benito Mussolini, who was two people over. He is his Minister of Foreign Affairs and Mussolini's son-in-law. And luckily for Larry, Roger has in the library the printed version of Ciano's diary. So I check it out and I go to 1939. I said, I hope there's something in here about atomites. And on, get the right page from his diary. Here it is. January 17, 1939. Ciano writes in his diary, DeFrazzo has given us information about an astonishing American invention of a very powerful smokeless, colorless, flashless gunpowder. But I'm skeptical. So he invites them to come to Italy and demonstrate. So they really are investing in this explosive. They are invited. It doesn't work. It's a dud. But years later, this fellow, Umberto II, who was the son of Italy's King Victor Emmanuel II, acknowledged, I met Ben Siegel. He tried to sell us dynamite. So this literally did happen. Well, the day after they arrived in Rome, somebody else arrived. Hermann Goering. This can't be true. I mean, all this apocryphal stuff is starting to come together. Gehring was there and he stayed for 2 days, and Siegel and the Countess were staying in the villa, and the Mussolini government said they had to leave because that was going to be for Gehring. So Siegel really did get kicked out, and he was very upset. We don't know if he got close enough to Gehring to shoot him. Gehring apparently did not have bodyguards. Debbie very nicely showed me a video of him roughly at this time, and he's out in public and he has no security detail. So if Siegel got close enough, he didn't try to shoot him. Well, I needed more confirmation of all this, and that brings me to this person. Millicent Rosen was the eldest daughter of Bugsy Siegel. And I saw her on an interview in 2006. She had never done an interview before, but it was for the centennial of Clark County, Nevada. And it was about a 30-minute interview. And in the interview, it stipulated that she had moved back to Las Vegas to help her daughter in a business. And you can see the business name during the interview. So I looked it up. It had a webpage. So there's a contact, an email address, contact us. So I typed in this nice note telling them who I was, and it'd be wonderful if I could interview Mrs. Rosen. And 2 days later, when? So I got a phone interview with Millicent. Then I went to Las Vegas and had a face-to-face interview with Millicent, and she permitted me to call her endless times. She would always answer, and she'd always be so pleasant. I finally figured out that she believed I was going to write a biography of her father that was going to portray him in a very positive way. So I think that's why she wanted to help me so much. Well, I asked her, I didn't want to frame the question so I'd get the answer that I was hoping for. I said, do you ever recollect your father going overseas? She said, yes. I was 7. She was born in 1932, so it's the right year, 1939. I said, well, where did he go? She said, well, he went to Italy. I know it was Italy because he sent us postcards. We get these postcards almost every day from Italy. I said, well, did he tell you anything when he came back? And she said, yes. He said he'd met all these important people like the Pope and the King of Italy and Mussolini. But then he said, I want to quote her precisely, he told us he had become very angry with one of the very powerful men he had met, and he sure wished he'd shot him. Now, she didn't know who the powerful man was, but I'm putting 2 and 2 together that she was probably talking about Hermann Goering. So there is a lot that is accurate about that story, that Ben Siegel had this crazed idea that if he could just get to Europe, he could take out one of the leaders of the German regime, and maybe in the persecution of the Jews. I want to talk a bit more about Millicent because I'm forever grateful for all the time that she gave me. The reason she was willing to talk to me, because she almost never did interviews with anybody, was the research I'd already done. You can go back to the FBI vault online, and in the search box, just type in Bugsy Siegel. There are 2,400 pages of material. The FBI had very carefully monitored him from early summer of 46 till January 47. They'd gotten permission from J. Edgar Hoover to tap his phones, bug his rooms, and 10 FBI agents to monitor his movement from place to place. So in the 2,400 pages, I have transcripts of phone conversations that he had. And her parents divorced in August of 46. And in October 46, he was going to go back and visit. And he calls them. So I was able to give her a transcript of a phone conversation with her father that took place in 1946. So I think she was persuaded I'd done the right kind of research, and she told me pretty much all that I wanted to know, except she said, I'm persuaded my father never killed anybody. Well, when the book was done, I sent her a copy. And then I got an invite from the Mob Museum. They said, we're going to have a VIP reception for Millicent Rosen. People are going to pay a lot of money to get to meet her. It's going to be a meet and greet. And since you interviewed her, how would you like to be the MC? I said, oh, I would love it. So I go out and she's there with her handler and her security guy. And I walk up to her and I say, Millicent, how did you like the book? Remember, she's persuaded her father never killed anybody. In the first chapter, he kills 3 people. And she thought, and she thought, and she looked at me, those blue eyes, and she said, I believe you wrote an honest book. Now, she didn't say she agreed with me, but she believed I'd done an honest book. And then near the end of this question and answer session, one of the theories about why Bugsy Siegel was killed was that his old friend Meyer Lansky had given approval of the shooting because he was losing money building the Flamingo. Somebody in the audience stood up and said, so do you think Meyer Lansky ordered the shooting of your dad? And she had brought some photographs, including her wedding photograph and the man who led her down the aisle. And the man who led her down the aisle was Meyer Lansky. When that man asked her that question, she just stared at him. Then she started to point. Do you see that picture over there? Do you think if I believed that Meyer Lansky had ordered my dad's death, that I would let him lead me down the aisle? Tough woman. But she was one of the most remarkable sources I had. It's unusual for anyone who is investigating organized crime figures to hear from somebody like that. So what's the point of all this? The point of this is during World War II and right after World War II, Jewish gangsters had this terrible reputation, rightly, because they were bad guys, for a moment, for just a brief moment, try to do something to defend their people. Thank you. Happy to answer questions if you have any.
So you said at the beginning that Meyer Lansky was one of the few Jewish gangsters that the Italian mob would deal with because they trusted him. So this is actually a larger question. All of these talks, which I've gone to most of them, have focused on the Nazis, rightly so, and the anti-Semitism which drove them. But the anti-Semitism which they fed upon pre-existed them, and in fact, obviously still exists today. To what extent were the Jewish gangsters themselves victims of anti-Semitism?
Oh, very much so. I'm half Italian, so I can pick on my own people, okay? People in the mafia, the Italians and the Sicilians, didn't want Jewish gangsters with them. They weren't part of them. They are the other. But they trusted Meyer Lansky. His best friend in the mafia was Charles Lucky Luciano. They had partnered in the 1920s, and Luciano, who was really the kind of the head of New York organized crime until he went to prison for his prostitution ring, they trusted Lansky. Lansky never got to make decisions that affected the Italian and Sicilian mobs, but they trusted him enough to work with him. And they didn't trust Siegel. Siegel was an independent agent. He didn't want to do what anybody told him. You're supposed to, if you're a gangster, a smart gangster, you don't get in front of cameras. He never wanted to get between Siegel and the camera. He just loved, because he was a good looking guy. He wanted to have his photo in newspapers. That's one of the theories. They had to get rid of him because he was too much of an independent agent. Well, the Italians also had problems because of their ethnicity. So you got two groups facing discrimination in America, and they parlayed well together. That's a good question. Others? Any from the people online? Okay. Do I have time to tell you about the Bugsy Siegel murder? You want to hear about the murder? This is the most gruesome thing I think I've ever encountered. So Siegel gets murdered on June 20th, 1947. It is one of the most perfect hits I've ever read about. On June 19th, he flies late at night from Las Vegas to Southern California. And he gets a phone call from Meyer Lansky. We don't know what they said because the FBI had stopped their investigation of Siegel, but we know he had a phone call from Lansky, have no idea what he said. So he flies to Southern California, and he's staying in this mansion in Beverly Hills. The lease is going to be up on June 23rd. So he gets there on the 20th, and he's there to pick up his clothes, and his two daughters are coming from New York. He's told them he will take them on a vacation. So when he's shot, Millicent and her sister Barbara don't know their father has been shot because they were unaccompanied on the train ride across the country. And she told me, we knew something awful must have happened because when we got to the Union Station in LA, our mother was standing there. She had flown ahead. And that's when we found out. Well, he arrives about 4 o'clock in the morning and goes to bed for a few hours. He gets up. He has 3 scheduled meetings, talk about business with the Flamingo. He's got some friends that want to go to a new restaurant, Jack's on the Beach, Malibu. On the way home, they stop at a drugstore. He's got the sniffles, so he buys something for the sniffles in that little bottle right there. And he's bought 2 newspapers, the early morning papers, and they're in his lap. And he starts talking to Alan Smiley. 20, 30 minutes, they're just chatting and reading the newspaper. What are they going to do tomorrow? And at about 10:45, that's when the gunshots happened. And the police are called, and they get there at 10:58. I mean, they get there really quickly. And they begin this investigation that goes nowhere. They interview people in Beverly Hills. They go to Las Vegas to interview people. Within about 2 weeks, the district attorney's office said, I don't think we can solve this case. But there are all kinds of people who come forward saying, I did it. And then when the police interview them, they have no idea what happened at this house. Well, the police chief at the time, a guy named Clinton Anderson, says, I know who did it. And he goes before the grand jury, and the grand jury comes out and they say he has no idea who did it. So it's an open case. So I contacted the Beverly Hills Police Department, started with the police chief. And I've done this with 3 chiefs. And I informed them who I am, and I'd like to look at the Bugsy Siegel investigation file. And the first chief referred me to the custodian of records. You should be the custodian of records, not the archivist, Debbie. And here's what she sent me. Officers arrived at 10:58, entered the residence. In the living room, officers discovered a male body identified as Benjamin Bugsy Siegel that had been shot in the head by bullets fired through the front south window. Mr. Siegel was pronounced dead at the scene at 12:10. That's all I can share with you. I said, that's not an investigation file. It's just a brief statement. It's an open case and you can't see it. So I tried it with the second Beverly Hills police chief and got nowhere. And the third one said, well, let me send this to my chief of staff. So I'm in contact with the chief of staff, and she said, well, I'm going to take this to the detective department next week. We'll see what we can do. So she contacts me 2 weeks later and says, they decided you can't see it. So I gave a talk again in December last year at the Mom Museum and said, if anybody in this room ever was in the Beverly Hills Police Department, would you contact me? Because I need some help getting to see this file. And when it was over, people came up to say hello and ask questions. And this one guy came up. He leaned in, he said, I'm retired from the Beverly Hills Police Department. You need to contact Clark Fogg. And he walked off. Oh, Clark Fogg. So next day I type in the Beverly Hills Police Department. Clark Fogg has retired as the chief forensic scientist in the Beverly Hills Police Department. He's their CSI. guy. Well, there's a phone number, so I call him up. No, I emailed him first. Said, here's who I am. Here's what I'd like to know. He said, let's not exchange emails. Call me. Man, I'm getting close. And I had this conversation with Clark Fogg, and he said, 10 years ago, police chief came to me and he said, we're about to be 100 years old. Why don't you write a history of the Beverly Hills Police Department? I said, yeah, I'll do that. He had a co-author. And he said, I started going through all the shelves, and there was a box labeled Benjamin Siegel. So I put it on the table, opened it up, and it was just a bunch of paper randomly thrown into the box. He said, well, I knew it had to be organized better than that, so I spent a lot of time. He said, it's now in a 2-inch thick black notebook, and the case number is something like 2589. He said, try that. So I contacted the Beverly Hills Police Department again and said, I would like to look at case file, whatever the number is, 2589 in the 2-inch thick black notebook. Would that be possible? No. It's a murder that happened in 1947. So how long ago is that? This is a good math school. You guys can do this. 75 years. So when I called, I said, there's nobody still alive who was associated with this murder. Why can't I see the investigation file? And they said it's an open case. So I did find that Clark Fogg, in his history of the Beverly Hills Police Department, concluded that Siegel, and he's a CSI guy, he said Siegel was clearly asleep when he got shot. I said, how could you know? He said, look at this photo. He said, had he been awake and reading newspapers, the first bullet that hit him in the head would have pivoted his head this way. But look at where his head is. He said, clearly he'd fallen asleep, and this padding kept his head in this place. Okay. And he said, oh, by the way, I'm convinced there were 2 shooters. I said, how can you know there were 2 shooters? And there's another crime scene photo of the detectives in the driveway next door, and they've circled where the shell casings are. And there's one clump over here, and there's one clump over here. He said, that means there are 2 shooters. I said, well, who were the 2 shooters? He said, I think it was the 2 Tonys. Talking about the 2 Tonys, he said, yeah, it was a guy named Tony something and Tony something else. And that's his conclusion. Now, whether he was trying to tell me that's what's in the file, I don't know, but this case remains open. I've called upon the people at the Mob Museum to try and get me access, but for some reason, the Beverly Hills Police Department does not want people to know what the investigation file is on this guy. But I'm going to keep trying. I'm 72 years old, and my vow is I want to find out before I reach 80. Well, thank you for your attention. And again, I want to thank everybody who was involved in the organizing of this extraordinary event, because it was so meaningful to both the campus and to the community. Thank you, Roger. Oh, one question. Fire away.
Sorry, we've got one that came in. So there were lots of Jewish gangsters who were women. Were any of them involved in the activities against Nazis that you were able to find?
Female Jewish gangsters, not that I have found. That doesn't mean they weren't doing things against the Nazis, but I found no evidence of it. That's a good question. Okay, thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Appreciate the call out there. Appreciate it. We should have walked
I
forward.
saw you over there, fella.
Yeah,
You were being a good boy.
he was pretty good.
You were
Loves
real
history
good.
talks.
You were
This
real
is
good.
good.
What's a good thing I didn't have the really bad crime scene photos that would frighten me terribly.
That's right.
And it's always our folks.
Well, thank you.